Tony, so I hadn't seen you for a while, and then when I saw you at Springbank the other day, I was mentioning how I'd actually used one of your basketball essay clips in one of my lectures when we were just introducing the constraints-led approach to skill acquisition, and just saying, it was a good contrast for some, I guess, more traditional, discrete or closed type drills, and then using one of those, one-on-one activities, which I think were filmed at Port Adelaide from my memory.
Yep.
Into the lecture. It's just a really good contrast. So do you want to run with it from there and just sort of talk to us about your background and your investment in the constraints-led approach?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dylan. Thanks for having me. Yes, constraints-led approach for me has kind of changed my whole outlook on coaching. So I kind of stumbled across this probably about 5 or 6 years ago through a guy who's kind of leading this change amongst the coaching profession, in particular in the basketball scene. His name is Chris Oliver, and he runs a company called Basketball Immersion. So if you're not sure who he is, just write it down. He's got an amazing podcast and a website that I highly recommend that you look at. With all this, like I said, it's fascinating because it's a modern day way of coaching. Skill acquisition is an area that has constantly evolved over the years, but now I think people are coming from an angle of evidence-based, where I think that's really important. And then one part is, yes, it's evidence-based. Yes, it works. Yes, it's the right way to do it. Yes, it's not an exact science, which is all good and well. But the next challenge that we're finding now is, myself as a coach educator, is how do we get that through to the masses? And people can actually experiment with that and go through the journey of learning. And this is the thing, a lot of people, and I think I mentioned this to you the other day when I spoke to you, is that people want to see that it works, and they want to see all the, the evidence on that, exactly that it works. Well, it's not an exact science. Like, it does work, but it takes, an effort from the person who's trying to apply it, to adapt it to the people that he or her is coaching. And that's where, that's where it comes in.
That's the skill though, right?
That's the skill in it, right? And that's probably we'll go into a bit more detail as I work my way through all the different questions that you sent me. So just for a bit of background for people who haven't seen me before, I don't know who I am. So I'm a coach educator. I've been doing that probably recently. I've actually been doing it for the last decade or so in different forms. I had it as a formal job at Basketball South Australia over the last 3 years, and I had a great time in that. And really just getting into the detail and trying to get it through to the masses, and different at different levels as well. So we have like high performance coaches, which is great. And then we've got just your mum and dad coaches. And then you've got people that just coach in the mainstream and continue to do that. And I'm so thankful for people that want to volunteer their time and coach and help people in the community. I think they're so underrated. It's not funny, and especially the amount of time, and especially with basketball. Basketball, as you know, Dylan, is 12 months of the year. Even when you have a break, you're still planning and thinking about how you can do things better for your players and your kids.
And I think often we can get really critical of, whoever's coaching at whatever level. It's a lot of investment emotionally, your time. Obviously it's voluntary, and I think some people get pretty critical just as for the actual coaching aspect of it, for sure.
Absolutely. So yeah, hats off to all those people. And if you're one of them, thank you, because I know how hard it is. I'm a coach by trade. I've been coaching for almost 30 years now. I've coached at all the different levels of basketball, and I think that's been amazing for my professional development. I mean, even up until now, I'm a development coach at Adelaide 36ers, which is obviously in the pro leagues, but I'm also coaching my daughter's under-10s team as well. So
you've got a great contrast. You see like the pointy end, and then obviously right at the start.
Both ends of the spectrum, everybody. It's incredible, but there's so many similarities. It's quite fascinating, and I've done that on purpose over the years, because the one thing for me is you only learn by doing. I feel like I've learned a lot over the years because I've made all the mistakes, but I was okay with that. And I think that, obviously depending on what environment you're in, you don't want to be making a lot of mistakes when you're, being paid and you're in professional environment. You want to make sure that at that point that you're across all your learnings. But, when you along your journey, I think it's important to be okay with trialing things. And I think this is the other analogy I used the other day with you, is the chef. Everyone's their own chef. And I think this is the great thing about modern coaching, whereas traditional coaching, where you're just prescribed, we do this, we do that, in a real structured way, is probably a little bit easier. but it doesn't really help the athlete acquire skill, and that's what we're here for.
Well, that's the other thing I was going to bring up is, like, I guess everybody has a and for whatever background, if they're coaching, they'll have a different understanding of what acquiring skill refers to. And obviously, and you can obviously elaborate whether it's a traditional approach or constraints-led approach in this sense. But, people have an understanding of, yep, I just have to go up and replicate activities or replicate actions or perform the action a certain number of times and just keep being consistent with it. And which we know that does work to a certain extent. But obviously, as a whole, we're trying to develop and get these players to perform within a game environment, in lots of different situations, rather than perhaps in those, maybe that's how we've set it up, a discrete type of closed environment.
Oh, absolutely. And this is, I watch with a keen eye with how people perform under pressure, whether it's the football on the weekend when I'm watching my Crows make some skill errors, or the ability to be adapt to the environment versus what other teams can do, whether it's watching the NBL grand final, how people
that was interesting, wasn't it? You
shots.
think, wow, how can it come down to a play like that with such an experienced player?
Yep. So these are these questions that continue to emerge, and it's ironic that it happens at any level. And you're talking about even under 10s on the weekend, like we had a really good game and we did everything we could, but we couldn't finish. So was it the decision making? Was it the execution of the skill? How does that link in? How do we regroup and go through that this week so the girls can learn and continue to learn?
Is that where you start with it? Like, obviously you look to coach from that particular model, and so you assess what happened in the game, and then you go back and think, all right, this is what we're going to do next week based on the performance the week before, and this is how I'm going to structure and design my session to hopefully allow those behaviours to emerge on the basketball court the next time we go out into play in competition, rather than just saying, all right, layup line, 3-man weave, 1-on-0 type activities, and develop the skill that way. Is that the way you look at it?
Absolutely. And I think practice design, and that's maybe a topic for another time that I'm happy to discuss as well, because I think that's critical. Whereas I think traditional approach was, okay, we're going to work on this skill for the next 4-week block.
So what would that look like? Like in a basketball sense, what might that be at under 12, under 14? Like what would coaches choose to do that in a traditional way?
Yep. So in a traditional way, they'll say, okay, for the next month, we're going to focus in on layups, both sides, and that can take different forms. Or we're going to, and in addition to that, we're also going to focus in on shooting, which is fine, and we'll block that out in a 4-week block. And then at the end of that 4-week block, they should be better at it. The only problem is if you don't put in, you don't use a CLA, you don't change the environments, you don't make it dynamic, which is more representative of the game. What ends up happening is you become good at doing, it's like a dance recital essentially, and you're good at technique. So I think traditional coaching is very good at teaching the technique, how to shoot, great form, no problems, there's no one around, there's no pressure. But as we know in a game, you have to make a decision before you shoot the ball, for example. So your shot is compromised. It's quicker. It's there could be someone closer to you, so your arc might be higher or your release might be higher. You might try to finish around someone who's a little bit longer or more athletic, so you might have to scoop it up around the other way, or they're a bit shorter than you, then you can actually get your shoulder into their chest and then create an easier shot at the rim. So I think it makes sense because it's very linear. We say we do A, B, C, D, and then we can pick that up and then put this into a game and hope that it works. That what we do know from the research is that unfortunately it doesn't work, and it's not. And I'm not highly qualified, but it's different to what academia is in that sense, where you get your fundamentals. Even when you learn to read, right? You go through the sound and you do this, and that's good. Now, people say, which we'll get into in a minute, about how you teach fundamentals. How do you do it within that environment, which I can expand a little bit more later. So I think one of the things that I learned a couple of years ago is the two most important things in sport, and particularly innovation sports, is decision-making and positioning. Yes. Right? And the skill is the coupling of perception, what you see, and the action you take off the back of that. And I think that is critical and needs to be in the forefront of everyone's mind when they're designing drills. To learn more about that, I'm assuming you've mentioned this man's name to your students, but Rob Gray, how we learn to move.
We probably I'll probably put put a few links into there and use that website a few times as well.
Yeah,
just to say look, there's
perfect.
some resources there. But I think just getting back to what you're saying before, I think when I've sort of seen around, I've sort of been in basketball for a while now, back into it obviously with my son, and you sort of go around and you see the different coaching approaches, and sometimes I've been really surprised and actually quite engaged myself, thinking, wow, that's a really exciting drill. They're trying to work on this aspect of the game, and I can see how that the players, even though they're only 7 or 8 years old, they can see how it can be viewed in the game, and I'm going to expect to see this in the game rather than dribbling around I don't know, cones or chairs the whole session. Because I think still, as far as your approach, there still has to be some time for that, I think, where they might need to work on a 1 and 0 environment, but it's about obviously being flexible as the coach to think, all right, we've done it now, let's actually see it. Let's see it under pressure, and let's see if we can, is that motor pattern stable or not.
Absolutely. So I guess that's probably my lead in to the CLA and why I think it's important. So I'll just work through the question. So what's the opposite or CLA traditional approaches? So I'm assuming everyone has a basic understanding on this one. So I'll kind of start slow and then I'll ramp it up. So in its basic form, as we know, like traditional approach is more so, it's very structured, it's more blocked reps where it's one thing after the other, without too much, I guess, interference or stimuli, where the person can take their time to, I guess, essentially perfect a technique, whether in basketball, like a layup technique with the footsteps, or shooting technique or passing technique. And the opposite, obviously, is a constraints-led approach, where what you might do, for example, is to teach a layup, you might have a 2-on-1 drill where it's a little bit more dynamic, where the person is dribbling in, and like we said before, they have to perceive what's happening. Like, do I have an opportunity to lay it up? Do I have what we call a lane advantage to go to the basket? And if I do, great. I've made a decision by perceiving what's going on, and then the next part is the action, which is the finishing of the layup. Now, that might look a little bit different every time, but then the next time I'm in the drill, the person might come across and take away my path to the basket, which will, I guess, essentially trigger me to make a quick pass to my teammate, who then has an easy shot to lay it up. So when you look at that little scenario, you go, okay, well, you've added in dribbling under pressure, passing under pressure, and layups under pressure on a simple 2-on-1. Now, when you start, so a lot of people say, well, how do you teach the fundamentals in that environment? Well, I guess you've got more time and you've got more space. And when you've got beginners, I think having an disadvantage drills like that, where you load up the offense with more, and even with the under 10s girls, we run this drill called 3-on-1 from the halfway line, and we actually use it as a game warm up as well. So what it does, as they're dribbling, they've got more time, they've got more space. Now they can make a pass, and then if they, then from there they get it, they've got to make a decision on what they do next. So it's the perfect, I guess, little scenario for the girls to stimulate their minds and switch them on, and kind of adapt to their environment. So with that, you can put some, I guess, essentially when you talk about constraints, the constraints are constraining something, whether it's, if you, in that 2-on-1 example I used before, that the rule might be you're only allowed one pass. So you're a bit more efficient with what you do. So I'm driving to the basket to score, right? And if it's taken away, I pass it, but I've only got one pass. So the rule is I've got to be really efficient with that. So I can't be just, I'll throw it to you, you throw it to me. So,
I think actually, just if I'll jump in, I think that's where I would say, and I've sort of heard it, and sort of when you observe, people might say that, hey, Tony, I've been doing that stuff for years. I've been doing 2-on-1. I've been doing 3-on-1s. We do 3-on-2 all the time. You don't need to use this fancy terminology with me because we already do that. And so, do you think it's like rebadging some of the language, or do you think it's just about, all right, I'm actually, you obviously added your pass constraint there. We can use pass, but would you say that's the sort of tipping point? Well, yep, you can do it and you can cookie cutter it that way, but this is the way that I'm trying to enhance your skill, if we sort of go back to the start, by limiting or restricting or constraining this part of your game.
Absolutely. So I think in that scenario, when people say that, I think it's great. I think do more of it and be more creative with your constraints, because now that we know, you're taking more things away from them to help shape their learning on whatever you want it to do. So, for example, another simple example, and I think you would have seen this in the clinic that I ran, was the finishing drill where you have someone on your hip
That's right.
and you've got dribbling on the spot, you've got up to 6 dribbles. So we are trying to guide them to their solution. And obviously the solution is to finish under pressure with someone on your hip versus I'm just going to dribble in and take my time and get my footsteps right and shoot it. Because as you know, and as they say, not every shot is the same. It will depend. And I mean, the CLA does, well, it obviously does link in with ecological dynamics. And essentially, I'm assuming you guys have had some conversations on this, but ecological dynamics in its simplest form is the athlete's ability to adapt to their environment, and the environment constantly changes versus, I guess, mental models and trying to remember certain things and expecting that they will just pop out of your head during a game and then you'll be able to execute whatever skill that is, in
Yeah, we
particular
sort
in
of use
evasion
that
sports.
and even just going back through some of the examples in the literature as far as like hard drives, and I was using the example of floppy disks, and no one knows what a floppy disk is now, as far as just like put that one into the the Commodore 64 and I'll get that output just because that's the one I've selected. So
Yeah.
but you obviously can't use that analogy anymore. But yeah, that's what we're saying. We can't just quickly, I've developed that, I'll pull it out. I've developed this one, I'll pull that out again. In this situation, we need to be able to pull it out under all types of environments, all types of pressure.
Oh, it's so critical, and it's the best way to describe it to the players and the parents in particular. Obviously, we can talk a bit more about that later, about how we can, because the parents play a big role in junior sport, and if they don't see pretty looking practice sessions, that can cause some issues. I've been there before, where you get accused of not teaching the fundamentals, but essentially the fundamentals, like we said before, is the skill of someone being able to execute a skill under pressure, or versus making the right decision, which kind of all encompasses the same thing. So there's plenty of different ways. Now, if people say, well, I've already been doing those drills, well, like I said, do them more, be more creative, adapt them to your environment. So, you probably wouldn't do a 3-on-1 drill with a professional team because that's way too much of an advantage, and it doesn't apply the right amount of challenge. So the other thing too that was really interesting, I read in Rob Gray's second book, is I think it's how we optimize something along those lines, but you can look that up. It talks about making sure we get the 70% rule, which is the challenge that it can't be easy for them, but it can't be impossible for them. And that helps with engagement. So I think that's a really interesting one. So once again, as the chef, you've got to make sure that you're designing the drill. It's got that right level of challenge, and it will depend on who you're coaching, how quickly they pick it up. Now, along the way, and mistakes aren't bad. If someone dribbles fast in and they dribble it off their foot, well, that's fine. Their movement solution next time will be a little bit different. They will adapt and I guess attune, which is probably a word that they use in the skill act space. I kind of more so call it calibrate as well. Their movement solution to what they need to make sure that they can be successful in their task. So the next time the person would probably bring the ball a little bit more across to the side of their body so it doesn't come off their foot. Now,
so we should encourage that as the coaches. Like we should encourage, the, I guess, game like speed, to try and, transfer that. Obviously, when we play in the competition on the weekends, and if errors come as a result of that, that's fine. As a coach, we just allow the athlete to try and address that the next time they come into it. Or do you address that as a whole group, or do you don't want to see any errors?
It's a great point. Yes, no, you want to see errors, because if you don't, you're not at that 70% mark to start with. Okay. I think how you guide them through, and this is the other thing too with the ecological dynamics and using CLA, it's not a matter of just sitting back and letting the kids always just work everything out themselves. You need to, instead of giving them the answers, which is a traditional approach, which is what me and you have been brought up with over the years, and that was not wrong. That's just what was known at the time. And don't get me wrong, I spent 25 of my 30 years coaching traditional. So it's
And
not
that's it.
like,
You're telling them the answer. You're the storyteller. You should do this now in this situation. Don't do that in this situation. And they just follow the directions. That's what you're saying.
yeah. And the problem is what happens is the kids will wait for direction, and they'll even wait for it in games,
Maybe we'll come
which
back
is
to that
not.
right at the end, as far as if you talk about something to do with parents and their input into the games.
Absolutely. So yeah, so look, as you can tell, like, CLA is very important. I think in modern day coaching, I think it's essential. I think we need to do a better job as a coaching fraternity to embrace it. I think the skill acquisition space and the sports scientists need to do a better job of, I guess, integrating it in whatever way possible. Because the other thing too, and I'm assuming you're aware of this, is that sports science people are not all in agreement with this as well. And that makes it tough for people who are, just a mum or dad. And then, oh, you guys kind of grant stuff. Why do you want me to do stuff? And that's a dangerous ground. So I think there needs to be some alignment, at least on the basics, that people can use that. I guess, look, just going back to how can we teach fundamentals by using CLA and the drills. Now, the other thing, I guess we can do it. You can, like I said, you might need to constrain whatever rule it is to help them do that. You might just have them playing guided defense. You might show them the steps on how to do a left-handed layups, but you might just have someone next to them and they're just playing guided defense versus live defense. And that's
Yeah.
a
Okay.
way where there's always a stimuli or something there. Or you might just go, okay, these are really basic here. I'll just step through it maybe 2 or 3 times and see if they can kind of get it. It doesn't need to be perfect before they move on to the next one. Right, because
Okay.
as athletes and kids get a little bit older, obviously their physical constraints change. They become
Yes.
stronger, and this is all comes back to is a kid going to leave under 10s or under 12s with perfect technique? Most likely not, because they just don't have the strength to shoot that ball above their eye. Most of them are probably going to shoot it from their chest. But if they can leave with something that resembles a hand under the ball and snapping the wrist and something that has a little bit of backspin that looks like a shot that they can, I guess, build on as they get a bit older, I think that's great.
Yep.
And look, I've spent a lot of time with under 10s and under 12s trying to perfect their jump shots, but essentially it's a bit of a waste of time, to be honest with you. I think you just put the shell in, but
Yes.
it's more so, and this is a big thing when it comes to basketball in particular, under 10s and under 12s, is that the right shot? And then how you define that. Is that if it's an open shot, we call that an easy shot. So is that an easy shot or a hard shot? So if it's a hard shot, it's obviously someone's defending you. Oh, it was a hard shot. Okay, cool. So next time, what would you do? I'd pass it.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
actually, I mean, to endorse, the club which we're at the moment, I hear that a lot at, my son's training as well, about what type of shot they're taking, and
Yeah.
that conversation with the player about, is that the right one? What else could you do? Could you dribble out? Could you pass out? When you get into trouble, rather than just launching it. So that's perhaps a good endorsement of where you've come from as well.
Yeah. I've seen that evolve over the last couple of years, in particular in the space here in SA, which has been good. It's still got a long way to go, but same thing as an easy pass or a hard pass. All those questions that you ask, and I guess open questioning is still really important. It can be longer initially, but the retention on the information that they see and how to read that information is very, very important. The other thing too about going, I guess, game speed all the time. So I experimented with this one a couple of years ago when I was actually coaching under 10 boys, and it was very interesting. So got to a point where and look, you're constantly experimenting in the early stages when you use CLA. So you're never going to probably master this. That's the other thing you need to understand, and you're constantly changing. So I got to a point where the kids were cognitively overloaded by the end of the practice, and they were just cooked. So it got to a point where it was difficult to do other stuff. So I actually, at the time, I actually finished off with blocked reps for the last 10 minutes, where we just went through, okay, here's a basic shooting technique. I'm going to show you how to do it. We're going to do it for 5-10 minutes. Now, that's your homework for the week. Because if kids are going to do blocked reps, that's fine. Do that in your own time. But don't come to a coach who's essentially there to try and teach you how to learn, perception action coupling
Yes.
versus I'm going to do the old tennis, I'm going to hit
Ball
X
machine
amount of
type
shots.
stuff.
Yeah, because I don't feel like because anyone can do that, right? So I don't think
Yep.
you're adding much value when you do it when you're going down that path. So what I would do though is I would do decision making drills or use a CLA where you slow it down, where you go, okay, we're going to go across the court, we're going to do dribbling, and I'm going to defend you, and we're going to go at 50%. And when I'm running next to you, my chest is in front of you, you can only make a move, a crossover move. Right? But if I'm not there, keep going. But if I catch up again, I get in front. So if there's a chest to chest, then you
Yes.
have to make this particular move. So that way I'm teaching them how to make a crossover move
Yep.
in a dynamic environment, basically for them reading what's in front of them. And I feel like that's great. And you can come up with so many different things. It's like it's endless, right? And that's where I think there's not one size fits all. You've got to understand who you're coaching. How can you learn from that? Like, how can you learn from that yourself and how can they learn from that? And it doesn't mean everything has to be drills. You can do, 3-on-3 FIBA. We throw that in every now and again. Now, the constraint essentially is there's less people on the court. You've got more
Yep.
space. And it's continuous. So essentially that's the constraint. It doesn't always have to be, and this is the other thing you've got to be very careful of. And putting points for so many things. Okay, so if you get a layup, that's 2. If you get a 3-point shot, that's 4. And if you shoot a mid range, you're 1. And then, because then what happens is it's almost like they're just playing a computer game instead of
Yes.
reading the cues. So over
Okay.
constraining is another thing that I've learned. I've never been a big over constrainer, probably under constrained to be honest with you, but I've seen very intelligent people that are great at it and they've got these amazing point systems. And I'm like, yeah, that's great, but it's just another thing in their head that they probably don't need to get in the way of them reading what's in front of them. So yeah,
Sure.
I hope that covers
Just
off,
yeah,
I
no,
guess the
that's some
different
great
approaches.
examples. Just to shift it a bit, obviously now you're working and seeing the best pros have got in Adelaide. Do you see any of these types of skill models or coaching approaches at that level as well, or have you tried any of those things with the development players that you're working with? And I think
Yes.
lastly, do they like them?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I've delved into a world that's still very heavy with traditional, and there's a number of like legitimate reasons that it is. So in the pros, the main thing they want to do is make sure during the week that they're tuning up enough, I guess, technique work, keep them sharp enough for their touch that when they get into the game, they're fresh and ready to perform. So cognitive overload and CLA is not the most popular route. However, I delved in and thought I'll give this a shot. So I tried it with the development players and the training players, where I was doing a lot of pressure shooting and pressure finishing drills, where like they couldn't just slowly get up their shots and make their 10 in a row. It was okay.
Yes.
Well, there's going to be someone running at you, and if you don't shoot it in time, they're going to block it, and then you're going to get a little bit embarrassed and you're going to feel, not great. So, or uncomfortable. So, look, I tried it and I feel like I made some pretty good headway. We had some challenges along the way, but for the most part, I made sure that I made my intentions clear to the players. Hey, I'm trying some new stuff. This is more game-like stuff. It's pressure shooting or pressure finishing. Tell me what you think at the end of it, because essentially with all the drills that I've used over the years are all catered to juniors, and
Yes.
juniors and seniors it's literally a different sport, because the seniors are so much more intelligent. They're faster. They've got, I guess, a library of cues and environmental things that they've learnt over the years, so they know the cheat codes as well. So I found that fascinating. But it essentially was just calibrating. It was just tuning and changing and the actual drill to make sure that it was suitable for, I guess, that 70% challenge point.
Yes.
So I found that really good. I feel like there's a massive opportunity in that space, but at the same time, it doesn't need to be a million miles an hour. Like I did a couple of different finishing drills where I would play guided defense on them, but like and I'm not very tall, and some of these guys are massive, but I would just hand them the ball in the no charge circle or near the no charge circle and say, no
Yeah.
dribbling, you've got to finish. I'm not going to strip or block you, but I'm just going to try and keep getting in your way. And if I might not get in your way, and then you just go and finish. And it was
Sure.
incredible how we're going at 50%. It was incredible about how many of them they just couldn't instinctively do it because it threw them out, right?
Yes.
And I was like, wow, this is great. And I kept saying to them, I've got you. Like, as in, like, hey, I got you. And then we
Yep.
just kind of, and
And
then
do they
eventually,
see that at that point as like that they're actually, developing and enhancing their skill, or do they, at that level, do they just count their skill as, like Curry, like I'm shooting, and making 103 threes in practice, so my skill level is going up, or do they see that decision making under pressure as yep, I'm actually developing my skill? Because I think a lot of people just, as long as I put in the time, then I'm going to get the result.
yeah, that was fascinating. And it's something I've always been intrigued about, and the ability to be over there on a daily basis and talk to them about that. So I think with a lot of the guys that I worked with, I almost brainwashed them initially with that because I was so enthusiastic about it. And
Sure.
I think probably 90% of them got to the point like, yeah, let's do some decision making stuff. Let's do some decision making stuff.
And do you use the
That
same terminology with them, or do you just set it up and say this is what we're doing?
Yeah, I try and stay with the terminology because then for them they're like, hey, like just tell me what we need to do. So I had to cater it a little bit and modify it. So I would I probably wouldn't use, oh, we're doing some CRA stuff today and we're going to do some guided defense. It's more like, hey, I'm just going to stand in your way, but I'm not going to block you, and we're just going to go at a less speed to help with
Okay.
your decision making and positioning. But look, there was a couple of them that become almost obsessed with it, and they were like, "Send me some stuff. Send me some stuff. I'll do, some basketball decision training with someone where where you throw the ball hands down and just shoot it, hands out is pass it back. If I run at you, it's drive." So and essentially, it falls into the repetition without repetition, and that's a
Yeah,
big
that's right.
sell because the pro land is all about reps. And sometimes, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but from what we know from the evidence, essentially it's empty calories, right? There is still a purpose, I guess, from a mental point of view, is that it's comfort and confidence, and there's still a time and place for that, just to get
Mhm.
up the shots and feel comfortable and get a bit of a sweat in and get your timing right. But what we know is that, yeah, when you're in a game, you have to, when you catch the ball, the shot's going to be looking different every single time, and you might not shoot it. You might have to catch it, and that for that split second, there's someone running at you, and the better option is to pass it to the next guy who's got a better shot than you. And you don't shoot every time down the floor, so you might shoot once every 10 times down the floor. So I think
Yes.
repetition without repetition, in that example that I use, just with the visual cues, is so much more game-like. And yes, you're not getting as many, but the quality of the shot that you're getting, or the quality of the decision that you have to make, is replicates the game more than just the reps. So I
Is
found
this
that
where you
was
see also
a trick.
from all the like the coaches that you've worked with at all the levels? Is that where you see the difference in, I guess, coaching acumen, or the ability for coaches to be able to, provide a wide ranging experiences for the athletes on the court, rather than, I've just been doing this for over 20 years. My team's won, we win premierships, and
Yep.
this is the way that we're going to do it. Do you see a lot of difference around the place in the coaches?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that example you gave there is very common. I think, but the sad part about that is those coaches eventually will get bitter because the player or the coaches that evolve and do take on more of the modern coaching concepts and engage their players a little bit more, they end up winning, and those other coaches, end up dropping off, or they get bitter because they just think, oh, the game's changed, the players are different now, it's not the same as it used to be. You see that
Sure.
footy all the time. You see that in basketball all the time as well. So I think you do that at your own peril, regardless
And
of.
basketball's not alone in that sense, is it?
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, I think it probably hasn't evolved as quickly as maybe the soccer and football, where at
Okay.
the top end, from what I understand, have embraced the CLA a little bit more. I mean, it's probably not as technical, so it lends itself more to small-sided games. which obviously I probably haven't talked too much about that. It's essentially the CLA examples I was given before with, smaller area of the court, difference in the amount of players with offenses got more, etc. So still, I actually wouldn't mind jumping in and having a look at some footy practices and soccer, because I do
Okay.
hear for the most part at the top end. Junior sports still pretty stock standard across the board from what I've seen, football, soccer and basketball. And it's just a bit of a lottery pick on who you get as a coach, and is that coach up to date? And it's a tough one, right? These people are volunteers. They don't have a lot of time. Using an ecological approach is difficult. It's not easy. It is easier when you've done it and you're comfortable, if you know what I mean. And it's so much more rewarding.
So how do coaches learn that? Is that just pumped through the coach education models through the different associations, or is it mentor programs within their club, or you got to seek people out like yourself?
Yep. So no, that's a great one. I think perfect world, every club has a coach educator, and they provide I guess a subset of small-sided games for particular areas, where even if you didn't know what you were doing. So when I did coaching footy a couple of years ago, I was so intrigued to see what it was like. AFL had a platform and basically had all the small-sided games, whatever areas that I wanted to do, and I would click on it and it was all there. And I took two approaches. The first one is just follow what they say and just have the mindset you don't know anything about football, right? I had some idea, and I did that, and I was like, oh, this is pretty good. And then I was like, obviously after that, I was like, no, I'm just going to make up my own drills, right?
Okay.
And I did, and it was so rewarding. And I had other footy coaches coming and going, oh, well, what's this drill? I just made it up. Like it's, it's 2-1 in the middle, and then it gets into the forward lines. It's, 4 versus 3. So we've loaded up the offense, and then you can only kick the ball 3 times before you kick a goal, or whatever that might be. So I was just making up stuff as I've been preaching to other people. So I think at the moment it's difficult, but there are external providers out there that help. Obviously, Basketball Immersion is a good one. There's another guy called Alex Sarama who is really on a rampage at the moment. He's bringing out a book in the next couple of weeks.
I've used I've sort of pumped in some of those videos from his practices on his YouTube channel, and they're great.
Awesome. So transforming basketball there. Obviously, Rob Gray. Rob's probably better for just understanding the ecological dynamic, framework. But he's obviously a baseball guy, but he's across all other sports. So a lot of it is self-education. Basketball South Australia and Basketball Australia do have the accredited courses, but that just basically gives you a taste. It's like similar to when you go to uni. You get a taste for the theory, but that just gives you the ticket to walk in the door. And then once you're in the door, now you got to figure out how it all works, and that's where the fun part comes to it. So in a weird kind of way, like I'm not overly, qualified from an academia perspective. I'm very much qualified from a practitioner's perspective. I've learned,
but that's what it's about. I guess all the people that go through university, that's where they want to get to. Like you said, that's a good analogy. It's like, this is your ticket. Now you're on the ground. Now what are you going to do with it? And obviously having coach mentors around the place where you can watch them, learn from them, get them to critique what you're doing. I guess that's the valuable part, where you can have, like you mentioned, if you have the access to have a coach educator at your club, or those, I guess maybe do coaching directors do that same role at all clubs, or that's a bit different?
They're time poor. They are very good at what it's just hard to get their time, and then it becomes this one person servicing 50 or 60 coaches. So yes, at clubs, but there's different ways. The good thing now is there's a lot of providers, and if you want to do the research yourself and dive in, you can. They're all there, whereas back in the day you'd have to go and watch someone or try and get yourself a mentor. So I would encourage people to invest in their professional development by obviously going to those people who are experts in the field, but at the same time, you probably know more than what you think. You just have to be brave and give stuff a shot, because some of the stuff that people come to me and go, hey, I designed this drill, what do you think? I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Why are you going to steal that?
Yeah. And this is the great thing. Like, whereas back in the day, you wouldn't do that because you're like, okay, we've got 5-man weave, I've got 11-man break, I've got this, I'm all good, I've got what I need to do, and then we just scrimmage and then we play. Now, I guess segueing on to the next one of the questions you've asked here is why should someone do it? I think they should do it because it's in the best interest of the athlete to help their overall experience. Now, we are here to obviously service the athletes and the team, and you've obviously got to get something out of it yourself. But I think even if you feel uncomfortable, I think you owe a responsibility to the players, because when people are doing sport, fun for them is learning and growing and getting better, and the ups and downs that's involved in all that. Winning, unfortunately, is it is at the end of the day, it's overrated, and it doesn't help with it. It gives you a sugar hit, obviously. Yeah, we won, I feel good, but is it really helping that person or player having a holistic experience where they can learn and grow and develop into the best player that they can be? Now, that might be that they become an amazing Div 3 men's or women's player. That's great. But they understand the game and they understand what's happening, and becomes a bit more intrigued and you're a bit more engaged versus, I guess, a rote learning approach, like, which is traditional. Similar to, I guess, academia, right? If you're just going to be going through things mindlessly and not really understanding why you do it, it's similar when you talk about ecological dynamics. It really is. So I think it's important to do it for those reasons. And I think sometimes if you don't believe in it, like I said, I think you do it at your own peril, because you do it on the basis that, well, I'm doing because I'm not comfortable changing or adapting. Now, as a coach, whether you like it or not, whether you're a manager or a professor or whatever it is, you've got to adapt. You have to adapt. That's just the way that things are done these days. You can't just roll out the same stuff every year after year and just expect that's going to be good enough. It's not the way that modern teaching is done, because the world has changed. It's so much more competitive. So much more dynamic. We owe it as, I guess, leaders and teachers to do that. So that's just my opinion on that.
Okay. I don't know if we'll get to all of those, but one thing I wanted to finish with, actually two things. Can you talk to, the perception action of, especially probably younger kids, doesn't matter how young, but having, the parents from the sideline start to, coach and add things into the environment where, now you're perceiving another, I guess, environmental factor, which is, not representative of the game. It's just, distracting in one sense. Can you sort of talk to how that might not be beneficial?
Yeah, or obviously it is very not beneficial, because they're getting mixed messages, and we know all the things that parents do wrong. Like, God bless them, they are more engaged.
All parents obviously want the best for their children, so they're obviously not doing it to make it detrimental.
I think we've got a massive opportunity here to get on the educational path for them all, as parents, as a collective, across all sports, because they need to be on board for this to work. Because, as we know, they spend more time with the kids than what we do. When you hear these ridiculous stories about kids getting paid to score goals or points or whatever, then what I'm finding now is it's almost becoming a bit of these team sports are becoming individual sports, where there's 2 or 3 kids running around, and they obviously, whether they're early developers or just have an ability to get the ball more for whatever reason, and then you got the other kids trying to comply and trying to fit in, but just can't. It's a very frustrating experience. So I think we have an opportunity here, and we've got to get into the parents, and we've got to get them to understand that if you want your kids to be great, it's no use them being a great under 10 or under 12. Yes, if they're good, that's fine. The best players are always going to score the most goals, almost going to score the most points. That's just going to happen regardless. But if their decision making is not good, and their positioning is not good, and they're very one-dimensional, which you can get away with, obviously, and especially in the boys' side of things, like boys obviously develop a lot later. You see it all too often, and it's the same movie script year after year. An amazing young kid who dominates early on, and then as he gets older, doesn't grow as much. The other ones, or the kids that keep grinding and they get overtaken, it's sad because you're kind of shortchanging him a little bit. So I feel like that discussion needs to come up and needs to be discussed. And, whether we do get rid of scoreboards for under 10s and under 12s. The other thing that I've thought and I've discussed with a few people over the years is, do we scale down the equipment? Do we have 10s, 8s, 10s and 12s playing across the court like they do in Europe? Do we go 3-on-3? Do we get even teams? So the fifth best player in Div 1 team is the best player in his 3-on-3 team. More catches, more touches, more shots, more mistakes, a better experience. I walk away and go, wow, that was good. I shot the ball heaps. Did you win? I don't really know, but I got up a lot of shots and I was able to pass the ball a lot and I got heaps of rebounds and I just think that's the next evolution for our sport, in particular in Australia. It's done in other countries, I guess, through necessity, because they have to compete with other countries around them, whereas we are in the best country in the world, but we're very secluded and we're very safe and isolated, so we can do things and not really have to be as, I guess, dynamic as maybe some of the other countries in that space. So yes,
that's like the result of that is what we see at the top level, where maybe those European countries perform at a better than what expected at the Worlds or the Olympics, and then also like I sort of had those notes where now you're getting the creativity that perhaps you don't see in the US based players. The Europeans come in and can do, well, that's why they call it the Euro step, right? Because otherwise they would have just been called something else based in America. So they obviously have this great creativity to them. Like, Dirk would be a great example, where he comes in and he's got all these different ways that he can score that we've never seen before, and now everybody just copies it.
Yep. No, absolutely, I agree 100%, Dill. So that's the thing. America is going to go through a bit of a transformation in the next probably decade or so with their junior sport, with their junior basketball in particular, to make sure that they're at the forefront. Because you're right, like the best players in the world are all international players when it comes to basketball in the NBA, and similar in the WNBA as well. Like the Australian girls are amazing, but at the same time, like I feel like we do great and we bat above our average, but the thing is we need to continue to keep evolving. So I guess that's a watch this space when it comes to basketball in Australia, but that's just kind of where I think things should sit. And I'm not talking about making sure that everyone's feeling nice about themselves and winning and losing, but the scoreboard's a massive distraction, because at the end of the day, kids will not want to take a risk because of making a mistake. Now that's the complete opposite to everything we've just discussed when it comes to learning and development. So I think we've got an opportunity there. I'll try and fly the flag and see how we go. So, yes. So I can work my way through some of the other. I think I've covered most of the points already.
You can maybe pick the last ones that you want to do, and maybe just leave I guess primarily the students that will watch this and whoever else, with maybe your 3 key tips if you're going to try and embrace it and get into using a constraints-led approach.
Sure. Look, the fundamentals, like we said, I guess I can't emphasize this enough. The fundamental is the perception action coupling. That is the skill. That is the fundamental. As the kids, we talked about, task constraints, environmental constraints, obviously with, it depends on obviously on a lot of things, but also the physical constraints. I think that needs to be taken into consideration. We need to be realistic about who we're coaching and what they can and can't do, and even the little ones, we task them to pass the ball ahead, but if they might not have the power to make that pass, so for them, well, they might have to take a few more dribbles so they can shorten the pass, or they throw it and it bounces there and it still gets there. That's fine. Yep. So I think having that in the forefront of your mind about what fundamentals are, we've got to change the narrative about what fundamentals are. Isolation.
So it's not dribbling, shooting, passing.
No, and technique, teaching technique and isolation. It looks good, but it's not representative of the game, essentially. Like, yes, it needs to be taught in a particular way to make sure they've got something, that resembles whatever it is you're trying to teach, but it's all the other stuff that we've discussed. How can we're trying to create adaptable athletes.
Yep.
And it's, some people have that instinctively. You look at some of the footy players, how they can read the ball off the ruckman, the midfielders. It's incredible. The backmen that can intercept. So they're constantly scanning. They're looking for cues. They're looking for, they're trying to anticipate what's going to happen next. That's the stuff that we need to be teaching. So when it comes to that stuff, like I said, I understand what people are saying and where it fit back in traditional coaching, but it is overrated. Isolation, teaching technique in isolation. I can't emphasize that enough. So I think if we can shift our mindset a little bit, I think that you'll find. And look, and you're playing the long game, right? So some kids might get it quicker. Some teams might get it quicker. Training's a little bit messier. Doesn't look as pretty, but let me tell you, when you get into the game, your players will be able to adapt so much quicker, and then people will be saying, "That's great,"
And that's what we're about. That's learning. That's the acquisition of skill. When you're seeing those small snippets of what you've covered, maybe it's taken you a month to cover it, but when you see that player that perhaps wasn't great at anticipating the next pass or moving to the next pass earlier, when they do it, that's when you say, well, they've learnt it, rather than now I've gone from 7 out of 10 to 9 out of 10.
Absolutely. No, spot on. There's an interesting one that popped up here with how many people embrace it. So when I first went in to be a coach educator, I think I might have got a bit ahead of myself and just assumed once I roll out the the slides and talk about the theory, once we walk out the room, off we go, and it's happy days. I couldn't have been more incorrect. It's a bit of a mixed bag. You get some people that are obsessed with it, probably about 5-10% walk out, and it's just changed their whole world. And that was me when I first picked it up. Unfortunately, there'll be other people that just say, "Oh, I already do all this. I'm all good."
Yep.
And I'm always walking around stadiums, and I'll pop my head out, and then okay, you're doing 5-man weave, or okay, I see you're doing on-air shooting for 20 minutes. That wasn't what we discussed, and that wasn't what you told me you were going to do. But okay, and then you get the people that just flat out refuse, that are just so brainwashed by the traditional. I don't know how you convert them. Sometimes it's I don't know, and people aren't going to sit down and read evidence-based papers. I've tried it. I've read a few over the years. They're pretty long and they're pretty detailed, as we all know. I think we all play a part in this one. I think sports scientists have to do a much better job of filtering it down, making it easy to consume in layman's terms, because that's the majority of coaches. The majority of coaches are your entry-level coaches. That might be 80%, maybe more. So if you're only talking to the 20% and only 10% take it up, it's not a very good conversion rate. So I'm being a bit hot on this lately, and I don't want to sound like I'm being negative, but maybe because I'm along the journey. And the problem is the guys that are really into it, and I've been like this as well, you get really forceful with your approach. And then what happens is you turn people off.
Okay.
Like, that guy's crazy. He's so full on with his.
And I guess the other thing I'm going to say is that Tony's doing this and he's told us to do this, and we still lose. That can often be the thing, and vice versa. Well, we're doing, well, this is a traditional approach, and my team wins, and we beat you, and you do that.
Yep, absolutely, and that's the reality. But yeah, I mean, this is the thing. So yeah, we've still got a long way to go in that space, and sometimes we feel like we've made ground, but then the problem is when coaches move on and they go, "I'm done with coaching for now. I'm going to take a break," and then the next wave of people come in, the cycle starts again. Yeah. And the turnover of coaches is also alarming as well. And there's obviously reasons for that. So not to put a damper on it, but there's some of the challenges that we've got moving forward. Just before I finish off with
right.
Yeah. So I was going to say, just before I jump into the 3 things I want to leave everyone with, to how embrace this whole, I guess, modern way of coaching is how we prepare for games. I'll just use a quick snapshot with some of the stuff I've done recently. So I think game warm-ups need to be essentially some side of small-sided game. And I've trialed this with 7, 8, 9-year-olds, and it's brilliant.
So the layup lines are gone?
They're gone. I was like, girls, 3-on-1. 3-on-1, go. I sit there, preparing for the game, talking to people, whatever. All right, girls, 2-on-1, off we go. That, all right, cool, 1 minute. All right, come on in. Done. The ball gets thrown up. they're in, they're here, they're there, that's fine. So repetition without repetition, but it switches them on. That's
Okay.
probably one thing I would say, just as a, and that's, look, we've got a long way to go in that one as well. I want to see more creative game warm-ups, even if it's for 5 minutes. Just whatever it might be, just get it to the point where there's positioning or decisions that need to be made. I get people need their reps, but I feel like there's an opportunity in that space as well.
Okay. All right. So yeah, give us maybe your top three if you're going to go with this. Where do we start then? What's number one?
Yep. So number one is when you do your practice design, you have to keep the following things at the forefront. Like, is there a decision? And obviously, that's done by putting constraints in, and does it help them get into the right position, whether that's on the offensive end or defensive end. So have a think about that. The next one, it would be every drill that you do doesn't need to be game-like. And so game speed. It has to have some element of decision making and positioning. And the other thing too, which I haven't really talked about this a lot, is differential learning, where you might want to work on getting technique better, but you're doing it through a way where you're freezing a movement, or you're putting something in. So for example, with shooting, you might mix some things in. So you might get them to do a jump stop and then turn to one way and then turn back to the other way and then shoot the ball. So that's working on their feet and making sure their feet are balanced and bouncy before they shoot the ball. So
Yes.
you don't do that in a game, obviously, but what it does is it's just providing you with a different way of doing it to emphasize something that we want in a game. So when they get into the game, their feet are a bit more balanced and set before they shoot the ball. And there's thousands of those kind of differential learning techniques that you can use. And I'm assuming you've covered off some of them, maybe. If not, I recommend you guys look into a little bit more.
Okay.
And probably the last one is just be okay with when things go wrong. It's okay. You can quickly pivot out of that, or change things, or throw them out if you don't want to, and then just go into the other whatever thing you want to do next. Be creative, adapt whatever you can as possible to the people that you're coaching. So what might work for a group of kids you've coached in the past, or pros, might not work for yours. Now, just I guess to summarize, playing 5-on-5 in basketball is still important. You're giving them, because that is obviously more game-like, because there's more players, there's more stimuli, there's more decisions, the environment's constantly changing. Don't be afraid to even start with 5-on-5 and then pick out pieces that you need to get better at. Start at 5-on-5, our passing's terrible. Okay, let's pull these kids quickly out and let's do a quick 3 versus 1 passing drill just to get them switched on about their pass fakes. Okay, we're good with that? Cool, back into the game. So just let your mind run as wild as it can with different things like that. And you'll get a good pulse for what your team is good at and not good at. And enjoy the journey, and continue to keep talking to different coaches about things that you can do better, and share some of the things that you've done that work as well. Because as a coaching fraternity, when we do that, sharing of information is critical, and basketball in particular is very good at that. Some of the other sports are very insular and don't want to share stuff, and everything's a secret. I'm not sure that's the way to go when it comes to making the game better for everybody. So I'll probably expand a lot on those 3 points, but I would definitely encourage everyone to have a think about that. And good luck in the journey. And like I said, if you got any questions, please let me know. I'm still learning as I go along with all this.
Tony, where can people contact you if they want to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so probably email is probably the best. It's Tony Casella, one word, @hotmail.com. Still got the Hotmail from a while ago, but yes.
The OG emails.
Absolutely. No, got to stay consistent. So that's traditional. Maybe I should go to Gmail. But anyway,
yes.
Thanks for having me. I hope you guys got.
No, I appreciate all your time, and you've provided I think the reason I wanted to get in contact with you is we can obviously provide maybe perhaps the academic sense to it, and provide some, even formative type looks at what it might be, looking like in our practice environment at a university level. But to hear about someone that's actually doing it and evolved over many years, and now working at both the under 10, under 12 level, and can see the pro level, it's great to hear your experiences. So I really appreciate the time.
Excellent. Thanks, Dylan.